How do you define a death cult? Take a look at this clip over here from Douglas Murray going into detail from his new book about how you define and understand what a death cult is all about. So we'll watch this clip together and then talk about it. But first, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Check this out.
I want to linger on your definition of Hamas as a death cult, because there's been a debate in your home country, in Britain, about how the BBC should refer to Hamas. Is it a militant group? Is it a terrorist group?
Is it an ebullient expression of social justice?
Is perhaps. I mean, Mr. Corbyn would think that it's a movement for peace and justice. And but you define Hamas as a death cult. Why?
It's got every single factor that you'd need to define it as such. It's not just a movement that desires death. It's one that glorifies death. It's one that seeks death, venerates death. It's a necrophilic cult. It not only wants death for its enemies, but glorifies in death for itself. I say at one point in the book that just look at the reaction of, for instance, a Hamas leader like Ismail Haniyeh when he learns that 3 of his sons, who are Hamas, have just been killed in Gaza. He doesn't mourn. He doesn't really seem to flinch. Now, of course, his admirers would say what a wonderful trait that is. That's not a wonderful trait at all. It's a deathly trait. He's happy that his sons have died in what he would say would be the way of jihad. He offers up prayers of thanks to his God that his sons have died in their pursuit of death. That's something which, I mean, we have seen throughout history, these necrophilic cults, but to have one in our own time, that's something which Israel and Israel's allies have had to deal with on the battlefield.
Right, in particular, the hostage parades and the dead baby
Yes.
parades that Hamas put on were reminiscent of medieval public executions, where people would gather around to see someone getting guillotined, that public spectacle.
Oh, to see a crowd in Gaza jubilant at the sight of the coffins of Jewish babies being paraded. What more evidence do people need of this cult of death and what it's really encouraging among its members and among its supporters? That's and then you get that thing outside of Hamas, outside of that immediate environment, which is why so many people in the West want to throw their lot in with that. And this is a deep challenge, I think, for people in free societies. Why in the West have we got so many people among us who glorify in this barbarism? And there are answers to it, but they're answers that will be quite unpalatable for a lot of people.
And those answers, I want to get onto that question in a moment, because it's deeply disturbing. But the fact that Hamas is a death cult faces Israel with 2 problems. First of all, the strategic problem of how you fight a death cult on the battlefield. It's one thing for Israel to say that Hamas is evil. Hamas wants the world to know that it is evil, and that is why it puts on the most grotesque hostage parades, the dead baby parades, to revel in its villainy. It weaponizes Israel's humanity against it by using human shields, deliberately building a network of tunnels inside homes and schools and hospitals and hiding rockets under children's beds. But it also makes it difficult to fight a war of public opinion when Hamas is so twisted and so depraved that in the West you have almost 2 audiences. Those who buy into, who are enamored by this death cult, and we'll talk about why that happens, but also those who fail to understand that that is what Israel is truly up against, because evil isn't something that we talk about in the modern world. It really feels like it's something that's come from another time and place. And so I'm wondering, from your experiences on the ground here right after October 7th, what did you witness? What are the stories that really linger with you, where you understood, I'm dealing with a different presence now. This is an evil from another time and almost another dimension, one might say.
Yeah, I gave a lecture recently in New York for New Criterion about the banality of Hannah Arendt's thought, and one of the reasons I wanted to do that was because the phrase that Arendt famously came up with when covering the Eichmann trial, although she covered it for a matter of days, was this phrase that I think's polluted the language since, which is the banality of evil. People are very keen on using this phrase, and my argument has been...
Well, it does make one sound pseudo-intellectual.
It does for sure. Arendt's phrase was, as I tried to show, totally unfit for purpose in describing Adolf Eichmann, who only fooled one person in the court, and unfortunately that was Hannah Arendt. But it also was strange because the popularity of this phrase is, I think, telling. People like to describe evil as banal because it's a kind of get-out in a way. Funnily enough, I mean, it's a slight misunderstanding of some people, even a misunderstanding of Arendt. But saying that having your principal prism of understanding evil as saying, well, it's banal, is a kind of get-out because actually most evil is very, very far from banal. It's visceral. It's there. Like it is one of the great forces of humankind. If you recognize that other human experiences exist, love, envy, jealousy, care, charity, and so on, you should also concede the fact that there is a force that we need to call evil. My suggestion is we're not very good at dealing with that, perhaps because in our anti-theological times, or we don't have the moral framework, or certainly a lot of people in the West don't have the moral framework or understanding to describe things as evil.
Which is funny you should say that, because the side that is taking Hamas's side, I get the feeling, does believe in evil. It just thinks that Israel is evil.
Yes, well, there is that. I mean, it makes it awfully easy for them in a way, because they get to offload and project all of their problems onto this one small nation. But
yes, as our mutual friend Mehdi Hassan would say, every accusation is a confession. Well, we'll get on to him maybe. But I think this thing of understanding that there is such a force as evil in the world, and that sometimes it makes itself horribly manifest, and that it made itself horribly manifest on October the 7th. And, you know, I say at the opening of On Democracies and Death Cults, just take that phone call that has become quite famous since October the 7th, that young Gazan man who calls his parents on the cell phone of a woman whose family he's just murdered, I think maybe even on his own phone. But he calls back to Gaza and he says to his parents, you know, your son's killed 10 Jews with his own hands. He's killed 10 Jews. You know, put mum on the phone. I want to boast to her. And the family back in Gaza are elated by this. And this was one of the things that from the moment I understood what had happened on the 7th, one of the things which I thought we really needed to think about and address, which is what is happening with a society in which somebody is so proud of their evil that boasts to their family about their evil. It says, put my brother on the phone. I want him to know that I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. And this wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a one-off. It was only a representative example of the evil we saw on October 7th.
Absolutely. And of course, there are a lot of people in the West who, as I say, for theological or non-theological reasons, don't want to try to unveil what is beneath this. But I think we have to do that, and to say, you know, sometimes it's not just that somebody who perpetrates an act of evil like that is somebody who's been misunderstood or has not been educated
or has
well
an economic
enough,
grievance,
or has an economic grievance, or something hasn't gone well enough for them in their life, or they don't get everything they want, or anything. No, at some point you've got to stop making excuses. And you know, one of the things that I mentioned in the book, but I think is really, really worth addressing, is something that the great Ruth Wise, emeritus professor at Harvard, and as I said before, one of the only people who adds any luster to the name of that institution, Ruth Wise said on the anniversary of October 7th, a lot of people said in the aftermath of the massacres, this is the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And that's true, of course. But she, with her laser-sharp mind, had the ability to focus on the next bit of it. And she said, I don't like this, this being used. Because firstly, she said, it focuses primarily, and perhaps necessarily, on the victims. And she said, some people have had the courage to identify the victims of the 7th. But very few people in the West have had the ability to say, well, okay, so that's the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, in which case, who are the Nazis this time? And why have we got so many of their supporters among us? You see, even in the 1960s, with the radical student movements in the West, there was no large-scale movement that supported a group that sought the annihilation of the Jewish people, like Hamas does. There was even in the 1930s, it was not the case that we had large numbers of pro-genocide people in positions of power and influence in the West. And the reason I mention this is because this is the bit of the equation that so few people have been willing to talk about. Yes, some people have been willing to talk about the victims, but why have we shied away from talking about the perpetrators and what actually motivates them? Why have we failed to really try to comprehend this cult of death?
Right. So what he's saying is that a death cult is not only those that go out and love genociding another group of people, but that those that also glory in the deaths on their own side that were committed to the cause, that lost their life in commitment to the cause. So not only in the necrophilic destruction of the Jewish people when Hamas goes into Israel and murders all of these innocents, but also the people who, as he mentioned, that there were terrorists that when their family members, when their children died in the act of terrorism, they were so happy and proud that their own children died in the process of killing others. And so this is a death cult. It's not enough to just enjoy the death of your enemies, but it's the joy of the death of your own in fighting, in killing your enemies. It's a disgusting obsession with death. And Douglas Murray does bring up an interesting point and an important point to be made, is that we do talk about that October 7th was the largest mass killing of Jews in one day since the Holocaust. And yet we don't take the extra step. We don't ask the question, okay, well, if that is, and it is a proper comparison, that it was the largest killing since the Holocaust, perhaps you can call it an extension of the Holocaust that was delayed 80 years. But the next question is, who are the Nazis in this equation? It's Hamas. And why are there so many people that are defending the Nazis or siding with the Nazis, or showing sympathy towards the Nazi ideology? Why is that? And that is an important question that we need to ask ourselves as a society when looking at this situation, that you're siding with the death cult. You're a part of the death cult. You're upholding the death cult. We have to ask ourselves, are we going to be on the side of good, or are we going to be on the side of evil? Now, being on the side of good and evil doesn't mean that Israel is all good and perfect and that it doesn't have its own problems. Israel has its own problems. But the moral equivalence over here is not even on the discussion table. One of the classic lines that's always brought to discussion when bringing up this topic is, what would happen if Israel laid down their weapons? Israel puts down all of their weapons today. What happens? Hamas goes in and kills as many people as possible. They wouldn't stop until every single Jew was dead, until the entire land was filled with blood. That's what they would do. We know it because they're a death cult. What would happen, on the other hand, if Hamas, if the Palestinians, if they put down their weapons? There would be peace in that region. No question about it. And so there is no moral equivalence, and good and evil over here is very easy to see. The question is, what side are we going to side ourselves with? If you like this content overall, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Take care.